Welcome to New Freedom. Welcome to Position of Neutrality. I got to check and see. I know people are still gathering up, but who's in here for the first time tonight? Anybody? Oh, good. A whole bunch of you. Perfect. So first of all, welcome. And second, let us warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. Primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for lots of years, prior to this, other places, but for a while now, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-Step Recovery. Why? The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. Make sense? So what I do is I just try and show you how I find my experience in the book and encourage you to have your experience with the book. I am not telling you what the book says. It's none of my business what the book says to you, because it's a book of experience, and you have to learn to find your experience in it. What we have learned over the years, though, is that because they're describing a sensory experience of power greater than us operating through us, that it has to be pointed out to people to realize the experience they're having. So that's what we attempt to do here. The other thing is, how many of you are members here tonight? Oh, good, a bunch of you. Well, welcome to you all. Welcome home. And so you know, if you haven't been told, no matter whether you got here on day one or you've been here for a long time, your families are welcome to come join you at Position of Neutrality, spend time with you in your endeavors to get ready to reenter, and also at Recovery Church on Saturday. So if you want to invite them to come, they can come hang out with you, come see what you're doing to get your head right for the rest of your life, right? So how many of you were here last week? Anyone here last week? So we took a look at the first step experience, the experience of powerlessness and unmanageability, and then we started talking to you a little bit about an encounter with power. We talked a little bit about Bill's experience of Ebby coming to the door, and Bill didn't know what he was seeing, but he knew he was seeing something different. He didn't know what he was feeling, but he knew he was feeling something different. And we told you that we were going to tell you that what he had done is encountered the tangible presence of God, right? And so tonight we're going to talk about Bill Wilson was a stockbroker or stock analyst, and he was really good at laying out a case to cause people to make buying decisions or whatever. So when he set out to write this book, whether he meant to or not, he laid out the case as a famous atheist sort of turned agnostic. He laid out the case why it was more logical to believe than not to believe based on his and the collective experience. So tonight we're going to talk about the encounter with power, the tangible sensory experience of power that revolutionizes our whole existence. Does that make sense? So we should have some highs in here tonight. So when that happens, I'll call it to your attention, because we would teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without a demonstration of the power. Fair enough? So we're going to be on page 44, chapter 4 of our book, if you're following along in the book. If you're not following along in the book, that's okay. It is a book of experience, and I like for you to validate what I'm showing you. Don't take my word for it. Look at because this is their testimony, not my testimony. I'm just going to show you what it looked like for me. Make sense? Everyone know why we use this book again? Yeah, the process described by the authors has been proven to work for years and years and years. And half of them, they're going to tell us about their demographics and things today. So we're going to look at all that. Okay, so chapter 4, we agnostics. So who's we? The first 100, and at least the ones that were claiming to be agnostic, but this book seems to speak to everybody, doesn't it? Okay, so in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. So in the earlier stuff, Bill's story, more about alcoholism, did you learn something about the condition of alcoholism as being perhaps an illness, not just a set of bad choices? How many of you weren't sure that was true? But okay. All right, so we hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Have they made that distinction clear for you? What is the distinction? That's right. That abnormal reaction to the chemical. If you're a drinker and you drink alcohol and you are energized by the chemical alcohol, it's a sedative. That's an abnormal reaction to a sedative. If you're an opiate addict and that causes you to become energetic, that would be considered an abnormal reaction. If you're a meth addict and it calms you down, you nod out like a junkie, that would be an abnormal reaction. Some of you apparently have seen that or done that. Okay. So if that happens, that sets you apart. That's the one symptom that all of us addicts of the hopeless variety have in common, is that abnormal reaction. We may have many other similarities, but that one is physical. Make sense? Okay. So it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take. Are either of those conditions true for you? Which did you discover first? Did you discover a progressive loss of control, or did you discover your inability to leave it alone once you stopped? Or both? Did you bounce between the two? Okay, if either of those conditions are true, it says you're probably alcoholic. Notice how they're in no rush to diagnose us. Why? Yeah, what difference does it make, my opinion of your condition? I had a lot of people with opinions about my condition. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay. All right, so it says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Notice how they just dealt us some truth. That's a little frightening, whether we believe or don't believe, based on the way we've been living, isn't it? Okay. So they're going to talk about that experience. To one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. So do we have people who thought themselves atheists or agnostics, or still do? Because we're not going to leave you there, so don't be afraid to tell us where you're at. Right? But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. Have you at least concluded that your addiction has taken you places you no longer know how to get back from? So you may be an alcoholic or an addict of the hopeless variety. Right? Okay, so to continue as you are means disaster. Yes? Apparently so. I mean, look at where we are, right? Okay. So now they're talking about the battle in the mind. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. So that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but think about it in your own experience. Addict death, happy, joyous, and free. Pick one. Seems drastic. Can I get back to you? Who delayed their decision? Based on what? You were having fun? You really were in delusion. None of us get here when we're having fun. You get that, right? Nobody gets to recovery on a winning streak. We get here and we think that right? But by the time we get here, we know something's got to change, even if we're not willing to do anything to affect the change. Yes? So we understand that conundrum. Happy, joyous, and free, that's ridiculous. Addict death, I'm familiar with it. Okay. All right. So what they're going to tell us, it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. What type? Atheist or agnostic. They either believe God did not exist or God could not be proven to exist. So that's a given, but that's not where they're going to leave us. Because what's the other half if half of them were that? They were believers dying in spite of their belief. How many of you are in that class? Okay. So they're going to tell us that we're struggling with concepts instead of experiences, and Bill's going to lay out the case why it's more logical to believe than not to believe based on their experience. And we just got to follow him along, right? Okay, so it says that at first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. So how many of you did that? I'll just not pick up no matter what. Any of you heard that bullshit? How many of you pick up no matter what? So no one gives us a how-to to not do. Do you understand that? There is no power required in a not-do solution. Why would I be seeking power to not do? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Okay. So at first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. How many of you lived in that fallacy for a while? Not that bad yet. You're dying. Yeah. How many of you got told that? Some of you got told that, right? Tell me when, right? That's the response. Yeah, no shit, I'm dying, doc. Tell me when. Anyone got me? Now we're taking you back to that first step experience. Okay, so, but after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. So they're not talking about a spiritual experience one and done, because one and done never worked for me. I got to find a spiritual basis of life or else. Anyone with them? Now, they're not talking about their theories. This is the first 100 who recovered. They're telling you what happened to them. And they're telling you that half of them were atheists or agnostics, but it happened to all of them. The other half were believers dying in their beliefs, but it happened to all of them. Does it make sense? There's really power in their testimony. We want you to understand that's why we don't adulterate their testimony. We just share it and help people find theirs in it. Yes? Okay, so goes on to suggest that perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So what they tell you about their agnosticism and their atheism? It got smashed when it encountered power. How many of you had that happen for you? Okay, so it's tangible power we're going to encounter here, and they're going to tell us precise instructions how that occurs. So all we got to do is come to believe. It's a process. It's not a one and done. Does that make sense? Okay, so it tells me that if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. How many of you changed your philosophies and your codes? So we have that in common with them, don't they? Okay. We found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. So part of the inventory process is looking at all the different times I sought people that were safe to hang out with. I'm going to change my playmates and playgrounds. You ever heard that? I became the dealer of the new playground. Anyone relate to me? Okay. Because I didn't isolate the one thing that probably was the source of the majority of my problem, did I? Okay. All right, so we could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. See how they're describing a gradual surrender to me? I marshaled my will. It wasn't sufficient. Eventually, I marshaled it again, and then I failed utterly. Any of you ever have that experience? Okay. So what they concluded by that was lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. They put that in italics. Why? It was very important, because they didn't just change the font on the computer. They had to reset the type in those days, right, to get that italics in there. So the reality of it is they need to call our attention. Look at the words. They didn't say you got to have a power to live sober. They didn't say you got a power to not do. What they said is I got to have a power to live. How many of you realized in your addiction you had a power to live perhaps within you, but it was often overridden by a power to die? And it had to be within you, didn't it? Because the very same person who knew it wasn't safe to do even one would conclude, I've overreacted, and go do it again. So this is a no-brainer. This isn't a theology lesson. There is a power in you if you have the condition I do that wants you dead. What am I going to feed? Am I going to feed the power to live? Well, I'm going to have to believe it's there first. And they're not asking me to believe based on faith. They're asking me to believe based on experience and then walk in faith. Does that make sense? Okay, well, let's see if we can share an experience with them then. So we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? So, we never like to leave a room full of perhaps tweakers or God knows what else, waiting for the answer. So we skip ahead to page 55, where they'll tell us the answer. That way we won't have the furniture disassembled. We'll get you an answer, and then we'll go back and review. Fair enough? Okay. So on page 55, what they said, actually we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Wow, I love it. These guys have been here before. So when we say God, because of the atheists and agnostics among us, you say power, because they're equivalent. God and power are equivalent. We seek power. Us humans are good at seeking power. We're proud of our power seeking. So I need to get you proud of seeking power that is divine in nature rather than synthetic. Does that make sense? Okay, so they just told us a key that I want people to know, because one of the deceptions over the years is choose your own conception of God, because that's what they said to Ebby. But that's where we start until we point them to the experience. So we're not going to stay with a concept, because God's not a concept. Does that make sense? Power is not a concept. How many of you believe in electrical theory? Okay, we're going to talk about that. Why do we believe in electrical theory? Because we've experienced the power. So we don't ask you to believe in this power we call God without experiencing the power, and then we'll call your attention. Does that make sense? Okay, so the fundamental idea of God, if you are a man, woman, of child, is where? Deep down inside. So, did you notice how your ideas do not come from deep down inside you? So this was never a list of what you think God is. This is about looking within you for the purpose and power for which you were placed here. And then they go on to tell you, it may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it's there. So the reason I'm about to embark on a searching and fearless moral inventory is and get armed with the facts about me, is I'm going to look at those calamities, pomps, and worships that are obscuring my consciousness of the power within me. Does that make sense? And when I discover my purpose, immediately behind the purpose is the power to carry that out. How many of you have had that experience? So this isn't a theology lesson. This is how we've lived, right? Okay. All right, so for faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. So for those of you that are still struggling, how many of you have had a friend? 2 of you. It's not a trick question. Most of us have had a friend. How did the friend make you feel? They did have the power to do that, right? The mere thought of some people can cause great anxiety in us. It can cause the butterflies. Same person can cause all kinds of exotic experiences within us, can it not? If you have enough capacity consciously to recognize the experience of a feeling for a friend, you know enough about God to get started. Now, for my religious friends, we're not saying God is a feeling. What we're saying is your awareness of a feeling is the power we call God. Does that make sense? Because you're going to find yourself separate from the flesh when you realize that your being is experiencing something apart from your flesh. Does that make sense? Which is why we want to improve consciousness. Because my problem is my flesh has been pulling me out into worldly pleasures, and they're fleeting, but soon lost. So I need to get into my core, who I really am, who I am, and whose I am, so I can walk in that victory. Yes? Okay. All right. So they go on to tell us that sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. Capital H. So, power. Let's unwind. Where are we going looking? Deep down inside. And how are we going to look? Sometimes we're going to have to search fearlessly. So now, logically, it's starting to make sense why I'm going to ask for power in the next step to enact a decision, because I've made many resolutions but never a decision, right? So I'm going to ask for power to look inward and search fearlessly, because that's the only place he can be found. Capital H. Make sense? Okay? He was as much a fact as we were. Now that means nothing to you guys that are believers and we go and slay people in the spirit and we do all that stuff. But think of the atheist or the agnostic, or maybe you when you first got to recovery. And now I've been through this process. I've taken the healing power out for a walk, and I've seen the dead walk and the lame get up. I've seen all that. I've seen it, and I've been an instrument of that. And now I know he's as much a fact as we are. You can prove to me you don't exist before you can prove to me God doesn't exist. Think about that as a witness. Okay? So he was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. It was so with us. So how many of you have to admit, no matter how much we know of this, no matter how much we profess of this, we still get disturbed by the world? We still look for comfort in the world. It often gets us into little conundrums, doesn't it? Come on, I got cameras around here. I know some of you. I know some of y'all been doing that. You even know her name, too. All right. So, we know where and how we're looking, right? We know what we're doing. We know why we're doing it. I need to find a power by which I can live, and it has to be a power greater than myself. I know the power is found within. I know I'm going to have to search fearlessly, and it's not going to end. It's not one and done. I'm going to have to continually search within me, because in the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found, and I'm always being prepared for a higher mountaintop everywhere I go. Yes? Okay. All right, so I'm back to page 45, because remember I told you we couldn't keep you waiting because you take the shit apart and stuff? Don't want you taking shit apart. I want you focused. Okay, so, we're back on 45. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Have you noticed how 12-step solutions have been adopted for pretty much every human problem there is? How many of you have tried to solve your current problem with the mind that created it? We do. We continually try, but the problem may not be the problem. What I'm thinking about the situation is more often than not the problem. Yes? And so I'm going to have to quit judging the moment I'm in, because all I have the capacity to do is project on it a past experience or future hope, not actually see, because I don't really see with these eyes. Does this make sense? We're going to start learning after we get connected to power how to get our vision cleared, right? That's what the later steps do. Okay, so many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. The difference between what's in this book, the program, and us sitting in this room, the fellowship. So I'm going to explain to you our program of recovery has little or nothing to do with our fellowships. That's just where we go to share the power and lift each other up. But not everyone in our fellowships has done what we suggest in our program. So we'll find that sometimes if people say the fellowship is the program, our friends will die because nobody ever gave them the power to live. And we have that. That's an awesome responsibility, by the way, not to be a dick about it, but to point out to people there is a program of recovery. We talk about it every meeting, and not one place Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Not here are the meetings we attended or the parties we planned or any other horse shit that people try and tell us will work. It might work, but my book says all other activities fail at some point, and I better be working intensely with somebody else. And if we don't tell them that, that's the good news this book brings. God will always meet a need with a need. So when you have a need, go find someone with a need. You'll meet each other's need, and you'll walk out free. It's true. Okay? All right. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. Power. Come on, that was weak. Come on. Power. Come on. For we've reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. How many of you thought you neatly invaded the subject of God or entirely ignored it? Did you find out that it kept resurfacing? Okay. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. So I don't assume everyone in here is in the same place in your walk, but what I do want to share with you is if you're brand new and none of this makes sense or it sort of vaguely makes sense, your only obligation to yourself is to share your honest doubt and prejudice. Because if you'll do that, any of us known by this power are going to be obligated to share this power with you. And I'm not talking about a sermon. I'm talking about a sensory experience of power. Okay? So some of us have been violently anti-religious. Anyone in that class? Okay, it happens, right? And to others, the word God brought up that's much better. Brought up a particular idea of him which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. So how many of you got abused by people claiming okay, and we'll apologize to you for that right now. And if that's happened to you in recovery, I'll apologize for you right now. That's not supposed to happen, but we know it does. And so do not let mistreatment from others block you from your life. Let us help you. Okay, so perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. How many of you didn't think with what you were hearing about this power was enough to encompass the breadth of experience you've had? Because that's probably true, right? The minute we know that we can fully define or comprehend this power, we've made God too small. There you go. Okay, so with that rejection, we imagine we'd abandon the God idea entirely. Good, you're doing really good. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, an inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. So they're telling you how they thought, they're telling you how they felt, and if you share that with them, you get it. They're not leaving you there. They're just telling you this is how we thought, this is what we did, and now they're going to walk us back in. Remember, we jumped ahead, so we're not to the point where they tell us where they went looking. They're just telling us how they were thinking before they went looking. Does that make sense? Okay. So we looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? So have you ever had a question like that? Just tried to figure it out. Denise got a letter the other day. Says, I haven't come up with my concept of God. It was one of the more honest, and I'm probably paraphrasing it wrong, but I understand where he's at. I mean, I've heard all these opinions, and I've seen people dancing around radically, and all of it seemed a bit wacky. And then I had my own encounter, and I knew what made people dance. Anyone know what I'm talking about? So we got to meet them where they are. And that question, how could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? Who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? The supreme being could. Yeah? Makes sense? Okay. Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? Have you ever had that happen? They're going to describe an experience they had, see if you relate. There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. You ever been somewhere in nature, maybe you had a moment, a human moment, a tender moment, but you're almost outside of yourself. You felt it welling up within you. It was just a profound moment, but you almost could watch yourself having an experience. It's important that we get Everyone, some of your hands came up. How many of you have been in a dangerous situation? Look at who I'm talking to. So you're in a car wreck, you're in a gunfight, you're in something. Did you notice how when you were in that really dangerous place, time seemed to slow down? When that happened, you experienced your consciousness. Who felt that? Somebody just felt that when I was talking. Okay. So that's the power we call God. We're sharing, it's happening in you. Where's my athletes in the room? Any athletes in the room? So the perfect play, the perfect dive, the perfect shot, the perfect throw, whatever it is. Did you notice how when that was happening, there was no real effort? You knew, you saw yourself making the catch, the throw. Anyone know what I'm talking about? When that happened, you experienced your intuitive self. So these are all the names that we are talking about for the power. It's something real, all of us experienced. All of that is consciousness, which in the later steps we're going to try and improve. Does that make sense? Okay? So, I'm going to go back now to where they are. Yes, we have agnostic temperament, have had these thoughts and experiences. So did everyone in the room who cared to have one of those thoughts and experiences as we went through it? Because this is important. That's your encounter. If you've had that, then we can get going. And if you haven't, then we're not going to make much progress. Because we don't go anywhere without power. So and if you don't want to, I get it. I didn't want to for a long time. But I'm trying to tell you we're laying out the case for why you'd want to improve consciousness. Okay? So let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. So, the authors are telling you, atheists and agnostics are believers dying in addiction. None of us can fully comprehend, we cannot fully define, but we can fully experience. And we can progressively grow in the experience, which is why this is a book of experience. Not because of what we do, because what we do is simply proving the power to us, through us, but the reality is what we start to recognize as the power and how we subordinate our worldly desires for divine intent. How many of you have found that you started serving and you really didn't give a shit about the people you were serving? Why'd that happen? We laugh about that, but I know who I was. Anyone else know who you were? I know what happened. And I know what I'm like now. And I can't explain that by anything Joe did. So, anyway, I learned that through this process. I'm just sharing that with you. So much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Why? God's not a conception, he's an experience, which is why we want you to have your own, yes? And then once you've had your own experience, your conceptions will change and change and change, right? What the hell, they just get in the way. They're not helpful. Conceptions aren't helpful. But that's where we meet you, yes? Okay? So our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and effect contact with him. So it's going to be incumbent on me to make the contact, because something about the nature of this power is that this power is polite. It's been trying to get my attention all my life. That's why things seemed to slow down. I was sense of awe and wonder. Anyway, the point is, I'm going to have to acknowledge that that power has been driving my life for a long time at some point in order to enjoy the full effect of that power. Does it make sense? It's possible to believe in God without experiencing grace, and it's possible to experience grace and not believe in God, but it's impossible to believe in God when you're experiencing grace and not actually realize that God's not a concept, that the grace you're experiencing is indeed the power. Does that make sense? Because I know that I'm not who I was. Anyone know what I'm talking about, or am I just taking you in circles now? Okay. So, our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So a promise and a condition. What is it to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction? It didn't say possessed by. I know a lot of people start seeing heads spinning around and green shit coming out. But we didn't say possessed by, we said possessed of. That's what the meth did in the mixed with alcohol. Yeah? Cocaine or whatever. Possessed of. So although operating through me, it's not of me. Does that make sense? How many of you have had that experience? So they lay aside their prejudice and they began to be possessed of a new sense. What's new mean? Unlike I've ever experienced before. Sense of power and direction provided what? I've had my encounter. I've been asked to follow. The next indicated step would be to make a decision, get armed with the facts about me, and then go tell the story about him. Make sense? Okay. All right. So it goes on to tell us that we found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit's broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It's open, we believe, to all men. So when, therefore, we speak to you of God, oh, this week, you guys are weak. What is this? Is it the weather? When we speak to you of power, we mean your own conception of. This applies, too, to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Guys, sometimes spiritual terms will deter you without your conscious revelation, but if you find yourself disturbed by something in the book, the reality is talk to someone who's found a way to find their experience in the book, and they'll talk you through it and find out what's bothering you. You've probably assigned a meaning to something that is not the right meaning for you. Does it make sense? The old-timers used to just hand us a dictionary and say, don't change the word, change your mind. Find a definition that fits your experience. Does it make sense? Okay. So then it goes on to say, at the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation. What do they mean by conscious relation? Aware that I'm aware. It isn't enough to be aware. Have you ever been aware you needed off on the next exit as you passed it? So it's not enough to be aware. I got to be aware that I'm aware. Yes? And so consciousness implies awareness that we're aware. I'm aware of a power within me that is not of me. Yes? Okay, my first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Now, one of the things that happens in our fellowships is people say, this is a God of your understanding. That's not what they said. They said I was going to have a conscious relation. I'm going to be aware that I'm aware there's a power flowing in me. And that's what I understand is the power that people have been calling God. Not an understanding, not something I created. I'm God's creation. He's not mine. Does that make sense? So I get a little animated about this because I've heard a lot of people all twisted up and they don't get the benefit of the power, and therefore they don't carry the news and they don't survive the addiction. And that's our fault because we don't want to that's not what it said. It's not a God of my understanding. It's a God of my experience. But I learned about how to find that experience because they told me the only first time they ever understood God is when they experienced God. Same way I understand electricity. I can't define electrical theory, but I can stick my finger in that socket. I can prove you that shit's real. And we're going to do that, right? Okay. All right. So it says that was great news to us. We assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith, which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. Have you ever had that thought about a man or a woman? Just, if I could believe like that, I'd be okay. Well, let me tell you the good news. If you can feel it, you already have it. And all we're here to do is wake you up to it. Okay? So, but I cannot accept as surely true as the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Those of you who attend churches, you're told over and over, he meets you where you are. That's a fact. Wherever you are, be there, and you're going to have your encounter, and then we're going to move on from there. Okay? All right, so besides the seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. So how many of you have had that happen? I used to hear people years ago in AA say, I'm sensitive because I'm alcoholic. We're not sensitive because we're alcoholic, but because I'm alcoholic, my sensitivity's killing me, which is why I need to outgrow sensitivity through improved consciousness. Does that make sense? Okay. So many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. So how many of you still bristle when you hear this kind of talk? Okay, so where's the bristling coming from? Is it in your mind or are you feeling it full body? Yeah. So we're always trying to awaken the spirit. And so however that comes, that's why we call your attention. A friend may make you feel any number of ways. This friend within you may make you feel any number of ways, but all he wants you to do is acknowledge he's there. And then from there we'll move. Does it make sense? Okay. All right, so what did I have to do? This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. So he's talking about what you're talking about back there. If it's happening here, then it becomes full body, and we can cast it aside if we'll just move forward. Make sense? Okay. So faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. So how many of you had that very experience? I'm not doing those steps. Screw that inventory. I'm not telling that sumbitch that for sure. And then all of a sudden, I'm tore up from the floor up, and I'm saying, who am I going to tell? Just lay. Anybody listen? So that's how we get open-minded on spiritual matters. When the spirits have kicked the shit out of us. Yeah? Okay. So in this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. Finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. How many of you have had a tedious process in addiction? Sometimes it is. We hope no one will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. Anybody? I'm going to tell you one reason why that I like to tell people, because I think people are entitled to the truth. If you find yourself in a fellowship of recovery from addiction and you don't believe the chemical that chased you in here is a power greater than you, you are wasting valuable high time. Go forth and shoot heroin like a gentleman. Let us know when you're reasonable. Does that make sense? I'm not bullshitting anybody. We're not mad at you for wanting to. I wanted to for years. But there comes a time I don't want to, find I cannot, and then I don't need a bunch of bullshit. I don't believe in a power greater than me. Every motherfucking thing's a power greater than me at that point. So we want to be reasonable. Even if I don't appear to be. Okay. So I'm going to jump down just a little bit. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they're firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Oh, I told you we were going to talk about electricity, because he's laying out the case why it's more logical to believe than not to believe based on his experience. It says, everybody believes in them without a murmur of doubt. So do I have any scientists here that can explain electrical theory, or do most of you stop short of knowing where the switch is? Okay, we're on the same plane. If it doesn't work, I ask if the bill's paid, and beyond that, we're kind of out, right? Okay, so why this ready acceptance? Why do we believe in electrical theory even if we can't fully define or comprehend it? Because we've experienced its effects. They're laying out the case. We don't expect you to believe in the God we call power or the power we call God without experiencing its effects. You may be immune to those effects. You may be too asleep to know, but that's why you got someone to mirror it to say, that's the power we call God that's happening in you, not from me. Make sense? Okay. So it says everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there's good evidence, but no perfect visual proof, and does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof. It's being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. So do all of you pretty much know what they're talking about? They're talking about a prosaic just means of pros. It's unimaginative. It's shit we see every day. I see a girder, but what science tells me is it's really a mass of electrons whirling around incredible speed. In fact, what they tell me is that's what's going on with you too. That I'm not really seeing you. I'm seeing whirling electrons, more, right? And I'm also told that human beings are, 90% water or higher than that? How many of you have tried to stack water? All I'm saying is we take things on faith that sound every bit as ridiculous, and then because we've started to buy into the illusion, we've forgotten the oneness. Yeah? Okay? So we have no reason to doubt it when, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. So have any of you done that? They're talking to the agnostic or the atheist among us specifically, but how many of you that claim to be believers, in spite of all the things that God has done in your life to bring you to this moment, you're pretty sure you ain't going to pull it through this time? So see how they're talking to all of us? Because none of us have a reason to doubt if we're made it to here because of the unique nature of how we make it to here. Yet we do. We got a chronic condition called doubt, which is why faith is such an important commodity in my life. Yes? Okay? We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Now, when you read that sentence, it makes completely no sense, right? This universe needs no power to explain it. No one would claim that, would they? But the minute we substitute the word God, people automatically assign a meaning. They don't understand that we're speaking of power, because logically, of course the universe needs a power to explain it. Yes? Wasn't the world pretty much in place adequate to sustain you when you got here? What did you do to create it? Not a fucking thing. Just here you are. I'm not saying everyone got a perfect thing, but largely it was here when we got here, yes? Okay, so something was in play. Some power was in play before my miraculous mind hit the scene. Okay. Yeah, no kidding. All right. So then it goes on to say, we read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments thinking this universe needs no God to explain it, where our contentions to it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. How many of you lived a life in addiction that looked like that was your belief? So we're familiar with that belief, and we know that's not a belief that we want to live in, yes? So I better be meaning in something, yeah? Okay. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. And then it says, rather vain of us, wasn't it? In order to have their experience, we have to think about what they said to see if we agree that it was vain of us. So when they talk about Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. So how many of you consciously decided one day just to appear on the human scene? Or how many of you had parents that sort of conspired to bring you in and you really didn't become aware till later? So that would tell me that you know nothing of the beginning, nor do I, or does anyone next to you. So let's move to the end. How many of you watched your friends die doing the very things you did? How many of you have questioned, why is that? How many of you have tried to take yourself out? And yet we're here. So apparently I don't know anything about the end either. And I got to tell you, for a guy my age, living through what I lived through, I can't tell you about a whole bunch of the middle. And you don't have to be old to have that experience, just dedicated. Right? Where's the people half my age that don't remember anything about the last 10 years of their life? Attaboy. You and me. Here you go. All right. So it is rather vain of us to think we're it, right? So why not regard myself as an intelligent agent? A spearhead, the driving force of God's presence on earth. Why can't I come to earth and love people like God loves people? Well, it's going to require power greater than me because people are maddening. How many of you have found you have power to act kinder than you feel like acting? What is that but a power greater than you operating through you? At the cellular level, you are action-reaction, whirling around at incredible speed. Doesn't that mean that you've been set above the laws of the world in order to serve a higher purpose? Come on, that doesn't take a theologist to figure that out. Some of you guys in this room used to just go right off. Yes? Okay. So, we who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion, and we've learned that whatever the human frailties of the various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. So they're talking about the faith. They're not talking about the religion. They're talking about the faith that's indicated in any given religion. And I'm not going to get into it tonight, but if you read this chapter on your own, you'll find they talk about the Wright brothers. And they talk about how everyone said nobody can fly, that's only a thing the birds can do. And these guys had this faith and this idea. These are bicycle mechanics, for shit's sake. No one's going to fly in their plane. They got to fly their own plane. Why? Because they're fucking bicycle mechanics. So they were a lot like us, is what I'm trying to tell you. But their childlike faith was the mainspring of their accomplishment, and now everybody flies. So it had nothing to do with their actions, but their faith. I like to point out to everybody that's here, how many of you got out of prison prior to a new freedom? For all our frailties, you realize that this is a softer landing than what was prepared before, yeah? Well, I guarantee you it was God that prepared this, because this was childlike faith, just so you know. And it was always ready here for you to land, right? And to make sure you can help others, because God wants his people out and bearing witness. Yeah. So I want to jump over to a story that sometimes we don't do, because I'm going to run over if I don't, but I'm going to go to page 50 first, and I'm going to talk about this experience, and then we'll get to this story at the end, and we'll get out. So page 50, the bottom of the page, they talk about the book. So the title of the book, people call it the big book, and that's unfortunate because people miss the profundity of the title. The title is Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So there's been arguments about whose story I'm telling, and my sponsor told me to do it this way. I don't give a shit whose sponsor you had. If you don't have the Holy Spirit, you ain't got a counselor. But I would suggest to you that these people told a story about their introduction. Does that make sense? And then they came to terms with that. So they're going to tell us about those people. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed, just like the rest of us. We like the shit that glitters, yes? Okay. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, so it's a process. I'm going to come to believe. It doesn't mean it's a one-step and done. I'm going to come to believe, just like I came to this place in my life. There was a process involved. Yes? Okay. To take a certain attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things. What do you imagine those are? I'm having my encounter in step 2. I might want to now that I've found power within me, I might want to ask that power to help me look within me. And so I'll say a third step prayer of some sort, and I'll start getting armed with the facts about myself. I'll start getting to be a better witness to this power, what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. Yeah? And you usually don't have to tell people what you're like now because they remember what you used to be like, and when you get better, they're like, whoa, I don't know what you're doing, but keep it up. I see it here every day, right? Okay, so then it says in the face of, had been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found, who's they? The first 100, and their story of the first several thousand, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Does that sound conceptual to you? No, it's every bit experiential. So as soon as I have my encounter and then start moving in this process to get armed with the facts about myself, find out what's obscuring the process or obscuring my consciousness of the power and purpose within me. I get armed with the facts and then start to bear witness. Somewhere in that process, I'm going to feel power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction flowing in, which is what I've lacked all my life. It's what I was out looking for drugs to do. Yes? Okay. So, power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements, those being trust God, clean house, work with others. Okay, I told you I was going to get right to the end, and I am. Rather than running over, I'm not going to go any further. I hope you had your encounter. If you did, grab someone to help you. And if you didn't, grab someone to help you. Thanks.